welcome back to another episode of the Evolution Exchange. Today we'll be talking about how to build a bad culture, and we have two leading experts in the field, Wen from SoftServe and Dan from Telstra Purple.
Hello. Hey, to you, buddy. Should I go first? All right. Okay. So, I guess we'll do a quick intro. So my name is Wen, and I am currently the APAC CTO for SoftServe. We are a now 30-year-old privately held company based out of the US and founded very proudly in Ukraine. And for really the last 30 years, we've had the privilege of working with, I would say, some of the most interesting, innovative, both startups, ISVs, and large corporations around the world, helping them to really do a lot of the build, the engineering, and actually even some of the advisory around how do you really connect your business needs and strategies to the tech that actually makes it happen. We're essentially builders by kind of culture and by heart, and so I'm looking forward to talk a bit more about culture. And just a little bit more about my background. I was previously with a company called Amazon Web Services. It's like a small internet provider. I think it's what we used to describe it as. My kids actually still have no idea what I do. The oldest actually says, "Daddy plays with Legos for a living," which I ran some workshops with Legos once, and they kind of glommed onto that. But I led what was called the Innovation Advisory Practice. It was a global practice where I had the great luck to work with very large and small companies, usually at the senior levels, to help them better understand what they meant by wanting to be more innovative. And a lot of this was bringing sort of best practices, not just from Amazon, but also from sort of the rest of the world. So you have these sort of naughty words like agile and design thinking, and what does that really actually mean when you want to put that into your culture? So did that for a couple of years, and before that was a lot more classic software engineering, product management. So at the end of the day, what gets me up in the morning is looking at interesting opportunities or problems, usually on the customer side, figuring out how do we actually create value for their customers, and in the process create better business. And at the heart of it, since I would call it sort of raised professionally in the digital era, how do we do it in the cloud? How do we do it with technology? Over to you, Dan.
I think you've stolen all the buzzwords.
So you probably can't see for those of you watching. We're actually playing buzzword bingo while we're doing this. So every once in a while when you see Dan and Shan go like this, like, yep, there we go.
I think you've got about 3 minutes out of me. Hey, everyone. My name's Dan. I head up the Telstra Purple business here in Singapore. Telstra Purple is part of Telstra. Telstra is Australia's leading telco. With the services products are outside of Australia, I should say, our international business. We're in 4 regions, and it's a large company. As I said, I head up the Purple business, which really is the professional and managed services are really driving the experience for the users and really moving them to those kind of cloud-first experiences. We're a strong Microsoft partner here in region, so we're doing a lot with them. And my role is to really work with the awesome peaks that we have within the team and really grow them and enable them to thrive, as you said, to kind of solve our customers' challenges. I think that's the best way to describe my role. So when we do talk about culture later, it's an important part, as we've kind of grown culture over the last 2 years and doubled the team size here in South Asia. My background, I'm from England originally. I did my master's in Sweden, and I spent the 11 years in Australia as kind of head of technology, head of delivery roles. Before moving to Singapore, I've been here for 4 years, that whole time at Telstra. I moved here, for my wife. It's an interesting story. and now have 2 young children here. So loving being in Singapore, enjoying working at Telstra, and looking forward to the conversation.
Awesome. And then just a quick shout out to Telstra Purple. in my old role, my team had the actually privilege of working with their peeps down in Perth, and
nice.
they absolutely loved the work that was done. So yeah.
It's interesting. It's an interesting journey for me. I've always worked in kind of 100, 200 people companies, trying to build the culture, working that kind of digital technology in a company that can go very, very fast, and moving to Telstra, a larger company, that's spun up a services arm. And so we are like, especially in Asia, we're like a startup inside a huge company.
Yeah.
So it's great. And as I said earlier, as you mentioned before, our whole business is around people. The people we have in a team, how they come to work every day, how they bring the energy to really help our customers thrive, as I said.
Thanks for that. So, as we know, right, culture these days, it's almost like a buzzword, but we can't deny that it's important to any success of any company, essentially. So, in your careers thus far, when was the first time you actually gave serious thought to this word culture, and how has that changed over the years?
Please, after you.
Yeah, sure. That's an interesting question. I guess for me, when I moved, I've been in Australia a few years. I'd worked at a kind of 20-man company that had grown to 30 people. I'd led their design and technology arm. I'd moved to a larger digital agency, the leading marketing agency in Sydney at the time. And I was kind of 2IC to the tech director. And I could see the way internally that the tech team were being treated by the production team, the PM team. And I was like, this is very transactional. They're not building any relationships. And they're going straight to people and telling them they need to work on their piece of work, ignore those pieces. I was like, right, guys, we need to have a better culture here. We need to spend a bit of time with the PMs, really set ourselves up to succeed a bit more, build those relationships, as well as putting in a bit more structure to really help the organization to thrive. And I really enjoyed doing that, right? I really enjoyed looking after the team. I guess they were senior people, they were all great people, but they were being pulled in so many different directions, right? That I was like, right, guys, let's come together here and actually work closely and build a culture where use me as that pinpoint and that person if you want to decide what needs to be done, right? Rather than just taking these people in so many different directions. And I really enjoyed that. And I guess that kind of people aspect to the role, it's probably always been there, right? But I guess that just emphasized how important it was to me.
Just to jump in a little bit, I think how you treat people or stakeholders internally is also a representation of how you treat people or your clients and customers externally. So I caught John Wick over the weekend, and one of the standout phrases was, how you do anything is how you do everything. And I'm like, wow, that's so true. It's going to be such a relevant thing to think of moving forward in my career and in life essentially as well. What about you?
I think it was about maybe 10 years in my career before culture or corporate culture rather as a word really popped up. But I'd say before that, I sort of naturally gravitated towards companies and roles where I felt like I belonged. And I think that's to your point about like how you treat people, and sort of early on in your career, a lot of that sort of who you become professionally, I think, is also informed by the managers, the mentors that you get. And I was lucky in that most of the companies that I joined early on, there was a heavy emphasis from the leadership, from the management around both the ability to encourage and foster growth, especially not just for fresh out of college folks, but also the senior folks, but also that ability to actually have the back and forth kind of debates. Like there was almost that sense of, and especially this is pre-internet and or right at the dawn of the internet, and still a very kind of almost hierarchical type mindset even in the US that no one was perfect, and I think that helped me to sort of start appreciating that the types of companies that you choose, right, as a listener, as each of us, is heavily dependent on also who you are. And I think kind of as I started learning more about who I was, and I think that's also just as important, it became easier to actually find the right types of companies where I would enjoy not just the work that was done, but also the people that I worked with. And even like today, one of the strong reasons I picked moving over to SoftServe was the fact that the company fundamentally only has three goals that they go after. One is, of course, revenue profitability. We are a still a for-profit company. The other two are customer satisfaction. NPS is essentially what we use, and the third one is the eNPS, which is employee satisfaction. And so, for me, having been able to grow up in environments where people matter, having to be a part of a company, to be part of the leadership in a company where people really matter and it's being tracked. I think it's very important that culture is a buzzword in many ways, but how you define it, how you provide that shape, and then look for the people who gravitate towards that type of culture, I think is really, really important.
People's pay package at Telstra, whether they're on a sales plan or on a non-sales plan, the NPS is part of that sales plan, either for the bonus or for their things. So again, super important. And actually, the name Telstra Purple, purple comes from people and purpose. Right? It's nothing to do with colour. It's people and purpose put together. Right? Because people are at the core of a professional managed service, digital transformation, whichever you want to call it, company, right? So, and actually, it was someone inside the company that came up with the name. In Australia, there were people were like, I don't get it. Why purple? Are they trying to be cool? Is this like? But no, that has come from inside Telstra.
That's really cool.
And actually, when we first meet customers and we're telling the story of Telstra Purple, that really does resonate.
Yeah,
so, interesting.
I mean, I could say certainly from our perception, both working with Telstra Purple back in my last role, as well as just general feedback, it as an organization, you do have I would say a different brand perception, and certainly sort of at least the perception of the culture outside is quite different than the parent organization.
So I think I was doing a mini TED talk last year, and public speaking I hate. It makes me so anxious, like a lot of people, right? And so I've signed up to the Telstra Purple Ambassador course, which was a 10 on 12 week course, which then ended up with a 5-minute mini TED talk in front of a larger audience in Sydney. And then when I was deciding what I wanted to talk about, I wanted to think about, well, culture. Culture's at the heart of everything we're doing. And we had lots of different exercises through that 10 weeks. And one, I drilled down into how to build like a high-performing team and the right culture. And actually I started with, we always reflect, right? I always reflect and I think about where I'd done this in the past, what would I do differently? And I remember across some roles earlier on in my career, I was sort of, right, I need the best team. I need the highest performance. I would now say I have a slightly different opinion. Yes, of course, we want high performers. We want people who really bring effort, empathy, and will gel with the team.
Right.
Having someone who is an ace coder or that doesn't gel with the team and always wants to do something in their own way, I would question are they the right person for your team. I wonder what maybe your feelings on that.
Yeah, actually, it's funny. So in just about every role I've had, especially when I started hiring, it almost always boils down to, and I love actually, funny enough, that Amazon almost explicitly says this for internal hiring. It's about 80% culture fit and 20% skills, and
even though people do 10 interviews,
including
massive.
Yeah, it's funny because I was a bar raiser at Amazon, which is a really unusual role. I think like most companies don't have it. It's that single role that has a veto right to hiring next to the actual hiring manager, and I mean I would be thrown into interviews for. I mean I think my favorite were were the data center related roles. So you had everyone from like pure network specialists to project managers that would be responsible for creating the brand new data centers. Like I know nothing about that space, but my role was precisely to just focus on, are they Amazonian? And that was like we'll call it part one of that role. Part two was there's a decision that is informed, and this goes back to that. Not everyone's perfect, and the hiring manager actually relies on a number of data points, and that's why feels like there's 10 interviews. We try to keep it down to basically tech screen, presentation, and then 5 people, so 7 give or take, right? Sorry.
9 was really
No. I get that all the time. In some cases, I've seen 10 interviews, but the role for the bar raiser was exactly around, okay, this person's gone through the tech screen, they've gone through some presentation. We know they can do the job. Now, the question is, will they fit into the culture? And just as importantly, the great thing about the culture, were in this case it was the leadership principles, corporate values, guiding principles, whichever term you want to use for your company. Everyone has something similar. That's nothing unique about Amazon, but it helped to inform, would you fit in? But just as importantly, what is your potential to actually continue to grow? And I thought that was a really interesting bit. Was that if we kind of break it down to like 80-20. 20 is the job you do today. The other 80 is the potential for you to do even more to continue to grow, essentially, in the environment that was created for this particular team at Amazon. And so, to your point, when you hire for culture and you hire for fits, it's actually probably, my biased view, a really good thing to do, because if you get rock stars who, they can get the job done, but they cause other people to leave, which, it's funny, I've been talking to a couple of friends now where they're saying, we have 1 or 2 rock stars, but they're just...
And not really a rock star.
That's the point. Customers love them, but oh my God, they're a pain to work with. And, they're constantly blocking our ability to do other things. And then you have other people who are, to your point, like really good employees. They may not have that sort of quote unquote rock star status, but they keep things going. They'll start looking, and you know what? They'll have many other options. And so that culture fit, that ability is so huge.
You want something to challenge, right? If you don't want something just to go along, it needs to be a challenge that makes sense for the rest of the team.
Yeah.
That is thought through. That isn't every single time, right? And then with single-mindedness, just to actually go and do what you want to do anyway. It doesn't all work like that.
Yeah.
Well, throughout your career, right, what has been your interview process for? Obviously, Amazon has a very set interview process. But let's say when you've had more control over the interview process, how have you gone about it, and has that adapted through the years? Sorry, Shan, I'm kind of just taking your role.
I'm really happy to take it. So I want to learn from you. So I'm going to ask you back that exact same question.
No, I've got my own thoughts. I'm keen.
It's evolved. It's much like just being, we'll call it, in any manager role. Like I started off with the, are you going to be able to do the job? And do I believe that you'll be a part of a team, right? And that's how I started. Where I think kind of Amazon's informed a lot of my change in hiring is getting other people, and especially a diverse group of people, right? Diversity in thought and roles and backgrounds really, really helps. I'll semi-joke that I'm a terrible hirer if it comes down to just me hiring somebody by myself. Where I find real power is bringing in people and having that back and forth. And in fact, actually, some of the best hires typically are the ones where there is a debate. In that we believe, you'll have half the group going, actually, we shouldn't hire this person. Okay, why? Let's talk through it. And the other half will be like, oh, best person candidate ever. And in that process, you end up finding, either the job description wasn't right, maybe it's not the right job. And then you also find interesting things that if it was only one or two people asking the same questions, you won't get that full view. I'm just going to say one quick story about this. We had a round of interviews where actually everyone was inclined to hire this person, except one person was on the fence in that they just made this one comment saying, I really like the person, but then when I looked at their resume, it felt like they weren't at the roles long enough to really have the impact that they did. And then so then suddenly that ended up going back to every single person, and they would look back at their notes and then look at the sort of the CV and go, yeah, actually, I mean, this is essentially a procurement role. So if you're in for less than a year, there's no way you can have that downstream impacts. And as a result, and I've never seen this happen again, but it was interesting to see what was everyone was thinking rock star, let's hire, to at the end making that decision, actually we shouldn't hire because there were too many red flags that brought into question, is this person actually really telling the truth? And I think that's sort of the power of sort of like group mindset. And then as the hiring manager, sort of my role is to actually, we'll call it, sort of facilitate that, and then ultimately that decision still rests on me. But that's, I think, kind of my evolution is really learning to find a group of people who can provide me diverse data points, have that, we'll call it, disagreement, and then use the data to actually inform a decision. Yeah. How about you?
So going back to the example of when I was working at the marketing agency, when I joined there, as it was a CTO, this was 10 or 12 years ago, so maybe a bit longer, his method was just pure culture. So he would do one or two interviews based on pure culture. And I was like, I'm not sure I completely think that's the right approach.
Yeah.
Right? Because I could definitely see people in the team, the nice people, but they didn't have the tech skills that was needed. So I kind of, over the years, and this has evolved slightly, it's kind of like, first of all, we have a culture. If you understand what the person may be looking for, understand their background, understand their interests.
Yeah.
And then have them do for technical roles, a takeaway technical test. I've never been one where they need to do it in front of me on the screen. Go away in your own comfort, you're at home, have a few days, bring this back, and then come back and walk me through it. Explain to me the challenges you had, how long this took, if you had more time and headspace, what would you do differently? If you were thinking about it now after the event, what would you change? What extra stuff would you need? I like you, and that has worked, right? Because that definitely means that you get people who are technically competent, or I'd like to think now, people who are a cultural fit. That does mean you can spend a lot more time recruiting, right? Because the amount of people who will come in and do well in that cultural part, but then struggle in that other, the second round is a lot, and I've definitely seen that a lot over the last year or so. But I think it's a vital part, right? And depending on the roles, right? If they're coming in to do a delivery role, they will come in and just walk through a presentation of what they've done. If they're going into a more pre-sales role, I want them to kind of pitch to me as if I was the client.
Yeah.
Right. And to your point, I would bring in someone from sales or bring in someone else from a different technology area. But we try and keep it to 2 or 3 interviews, because I think 7, personally, I think 7 is...
It's quite exhausted, yeah.
Especially for the size of team that we have. But I just don't have that time as well, right? To be perfectly frank. And I think people can get put off by that. And actually see people get put off by actually doing the technical test. I stick to it, but you see people. What would be interesting to see if, obviously, it's gone from a kind of candidate market to maybe now a company market with all the changes in tech.
Yeah.
And what patterns have you seen, and the types of people that come into the team? Have you had to make any hard decisions over the last year when you were trying to hire in a tougher period, when it was a candidate market?
Great question. I think honestly, the hardest decision we've had to make is to not compromise on our hiring quality. I mean, it's funny because like even right now, there are, like, we have multiple roles open across the broader just APAC organization, and it's like that there isn't a shortage of work. There's definitely a definite need for these people. In fact, I would say we probably actually need about double the number of people that we have available, open. But early on, we had a couple, I think, misfires in terms of either hiring for a specific role for that specific purpose or customer that I think kind of ultimately created more work for the rest of the team on the back end. So nowadays it's really about having the clarity of what is the role, what's the growth opportunity.
It's an interesting point, like making sure you don't compromise. During any of those times, have you been ever threatened with losing headcount going across financial years?
We're slightly,
because that can change, and mistakes or whatever, the wrong person can potentially be hired in those situations.
Yeah, so SoftServe is a bit unique in that as a privately held company, and so the founders are still the pretty much all the majority shareholders or complete shareholders, I guess, effectively. The focus is on growth and sustainability of the organization. So if there's a headcount, that headcount actually can disappear. But it's not tied to typically sort of a budget cycle or a quarterly cycle. It's really tied to the needs of the market. And so if we're seeing that the market is slowing down or shrinking, it's not actually a bad thing as a manager or leader to say, actually let's work the headcount, because we know that the minute signs show that we need to start investing or really start growing again, that headcount can just as easily come back. And I think there's a healthiness, but I do remember
it's also looking after people, right? Because you don't want to push forward, bring someone into that role that then, if the market is changing, you have to then potentially let them go.
Exactly.
That's not well-being. That's not wellness of people.
And that's exactly it. It's like I think part of the challenges I've seen when I was dealing with other companies around their culture was when you have these sort of fixed cycles, and I usually liken it to the leftover budget that you have to spend before the year ends, right? In some ways, I guess your headcount research are sort of similar. That's like, I better hire because that headcount is gone. But it's just the amount of time invested in getting the hire, and if it's a let's call it not optimal hire, then you have to either manage them to perform, manage them out, or you end up finding a better candidate that actually you could have had you waited, right? So there's all these things where I think a part of it isn't just the manager or the culture, but it's really also the organizational structure, the financial structure and budgeting that has a huge impact. I mean,
I guess the message there is take your time, don't be rushed, push back if you need to.
If your organizational structure also allows for it, because otherwise, you try and do the right thing in a structure that isn't designed for it, then also bad things.
Push back where you can. I should bring a little asterisk in.
Well, speaking of which, since you run the organization, how do you make those trade-offs?
Last one at I probably did spend a bit too much time recruiting using that method I used before. And look, not everyone. We had a growth year last year. Not everyone I brought into the team was the right fit. We did the best we could. I tried to bring in the right people for those interviews, but it's going to happen from time to time, right? When everyone has the best interests. The employee, the candidate, right? People want to take the next step. We feel like the person ready for the next step, and it might not quite still be that right role. I guess you just have to really weigh it up. Spend time with everyone inside your team on the interview panel to try and make the best decisions. But as I said, as you mentioned, I think you really just need to think through these things. Try not to be pushed into something. Because otherwise, no one wants to join an organisation and 3-6 months later they have to leave, right?
Yeah,
that's not ideal for him to be, I guess. How is your organisations recently done about hiring more female talent, and I don't know how much you can say, but is there a kind of quota for CVs, interviews, hiring of female talent into tech roles inside your organisation? Obviously, historically, maybe the word is, there is more male people who are doing engineering degrees.
Yeah.
I don't know the statistics here in Asia. Like growing up in the UK, I did a business and IT degree that's all IT. There was 102 people in the class, 100 were males.
Yeah.
Actually, in Sweden, and where I was there, it was more 60-40, and they pushed females into more technology earlier on in schools. And I don't know, Shan, what it's like here in Asia. But we do see, especially within Telstra, trying to bring in more equality in the workplace, trying to ensure we're getting to a CV level of as much 50-50 as possible, trying to bring through more females through for technical interviews. And let's say a job requires 5 skills and they have 3. Can we bring them in and give them a chance and grow them to have those 5? I wondered how you guys are approaching.
I think just to piggyback off that question as well, I think, just going back to the buzzword bingo again, diversity, inclusion, big words these days as well. How does that as well?
Also, don't forget equity.
Exactly. How does
Equity or equality?
Equality. I've heard equality, equitable. Yeah.
How does diversity, inclusion, and equality, play a part in team culture and company culture?
I mean, you're literally wearing a shirt, making a statement. So I feel like.
Well, I want you to answer the female pit pass, and then we can come back to that. That's some interesting.
Yeah. I'm going to start with a reasonably controversial statement. I believe it's a two-way street, and the reason I say that is that there is. Like you pointed out, starting in college, I was a chemical engineer, which I believe at the time, and as males in college, we tended to keep count of the number of women in our classes. Were noticed rather. We had the highest percentage of females in any engineering department. That was about 20%, which was fairly high. I think computer science back then, this is pre-internet, was something like less than 1%. We had 100 males, and it was literally one.
Bit like my uni degree.
Yeah, and so I think there's a challenge already right there, and so looking into the market and saying that we want to hire for more balance is difficult, because when the pool isn't there, it makes it very, very difficult. So it's like trying to say we want to do the right things when one of the most important precursor steps aren't there. And I think kind of what I really value over the last 5 to 10 years is that sort of the growth and awareness, especially of strong female technical leaders that are out in the market. So you have women in engineering, you have STEM advocates for females. That hopefully will help solve the problem 10 to 20 years down the road. And to your point, it's having the right candidates who have the potential is powerful. I tend to bias, and I'll use the word bias in this case, to not hiring people to balance out my ratios, right? If it comes down to it,
that's a good point.
Yeah, but the thing is, it's hard, right? Because if especially, and I won't name which company that I was a part of, where they started having these arbitrary ratios, and it wasn't just about gender, it was about certain races, U.S.
Yeah.
It becomes hard, because if we think about it from their shoes, one is like, okay, great, I've now entered, might be a prestigious tech company, but it might also start having sort of that kind of side effect. And I literally had this from colleagues who were wondering, did I get in because of my gender?
So this is an interesting point, because I was on a panel last week where end of women in
Yeah.
leadership, what women want. And I guess they asked me a question around this, and I was like, the females I've been honoured to lead across Australia, in Singapore, in the UK, aren't looking for a free pass. They're looking for equal opportunity.
Yes.
Right? They're looking for equal pay. They're looking for same opportunities for promotion, and they're looking for being recognised for good work.
Yeah.
Right. And that is the important point. It's saying you're not just going to give someone a role because they're female, different thing, but it's getting that equal opportunity to bring them into the team, because you still need to be able to do the work.
Yeah, and as a leader, there's also I think it was we talked about a lot about sort of signaling, right? It's not just what you tell the team, tell the org to do. It's also how you show up, how the rest of your leadership act and behave, and it's like when we provide space for, and it doesn't have to be just women. It could be any background that isn't widely represented. That they feel comfortable, they feel safe, that they're there because they were actually the best candidates, right? And I think that's also the other parts. I mean, it's so funny about my last team, and I rarely really sort of talk about it outside of my job. Was statistically actually 50% women globally. My direct leadership team was just over 50% female, but they weren't chosen because of gender. They were chosen because they, and I'm going to swear, could kick the ass out of every other teammate and customer. But what I did notice though was it took forever for that first female hire that was brought into the team. Yeah. But she was such a strong, amazing leader, such a great role model that it had a snowball effect where when you're going through the interviewing process and you have women. And like this is a team that had no brand recognition, and even with Amazon, and it also it's part of a tech team. They're thinking, why would I do this versus joining like a woman design agency or something that had more diversity. But they start seeing that there are great role models and that are actively kicking ass. They're not token hires. And to your point, like you want to hire the best, and I think that had that snowball effect where next thing you know we're hiring. A lot more women than men, but we're not actually having to seek them out because we're just hiring for the best,
which is fantastic.
Yeah, but it's hard to get that. It's like that first couple that yes, this is exactly what we're talking about.
And then bring them into the team. Make sure that you've got the right culture. Coming back to the cultural point.
Yeah, and they're there leading and representing.
Something, and maybe this isn't just a female, it's a male. Like, actually seeing culture differences between Australia and Asia. Right? So leading teams in Asia where lots of people are outspoken, lots of people have their view, and it's more about managing. Okay, all right, guys, let's take it one at a time. To hear. And actually, it took me a while to get used to it, where lots of people won't like to speak out in a meeting. But as a leader, you have to ensure that you go around and actually afterwards get everyone's point of view to make sure it is balanced and give everyone, like, it sounds a bit cheesy, but make sure everyone is heard, that everyone has a voice. And actually that formed part of the tech that I was doing. For me, part of culture is really fascinating to see the dynamics of the teams, and actually as we scale as teams, still ensuring that we have one-to-ones, we have the team meetings, and that everyone in there has the equal voice, not just the person who shouts loudest in the room.
Well, so I love that you bring this up. So how do you, as a leader of leaders, also sort of foster and kind of, I guess, sort of continue to reinforce getting everyone to have that equal voice? I mean, in meetings or just in general, like in the workplace. I mean, especially
it's not always going to happen in that exact meeting. You can try and you can stop people, and you can try and use kind of agile design thinking methodologies to bring everyone into the room and really make it all encompassing. And I think it's reaching out to people afterwards, whether it be face to face, whether it be on Teams or Slack or whatever your communication platform may be. But also having those one-to-ones as well, right? To ensure that people are happy, and actually having people inside the team that you know these people that you can go to and say, hey, do you reckon they're okay with that as well, right? Because not everyone's going to want to come to the manager or the two up and say, actually, Dan, I felt this. Right? So it's important to have the people inside the teams who you trust, who you can go into for feedback, to ensure that actually this isn't just your view, Dan, or it isn't just a couple of people. So it's every other's view. And I've seen that change has really helped me as a leader, right? And especially as we've grown, right? We've doubled in size over the last year. And I've actually brought in another layer of people, and I think we might have been speaking about this before, or maybe it was at the beginning, I can't remember. And actually having technical leaders that come in, so not people who are doing their pay reviews and all this stuff, but people who are, let's say, in their pod, so a delivery pod leader with the delivery peeps in, and actually trusting them to ensure that they go and get all the feedback from their teams, but actually still having one-to-ones with the pods and all the people in the pods at least once a month, right, to see how they're going. And it can just be a coffee. It doesn't need to be a formal sit down in an office. Right? It can just be a quick coffee, see how they're going, see how they're finding things, see for the team meetings, is there anything else they wanted to add. And I think they like that. They like the fact that it's not just, okay, Dan, we've now got this another level of structure, and you just talk to your direct reports. You actually this is still a purple team. This is, again, sounds a bit cheesy. It's still a purple family.
I mean, I like the use of family actually for teams when they're a certain size, because it really does feel like a family. You're constantly together. You don't always get along, and you do have your favorites, no matter what mom and dad like to say. What? But you just mentioned that your team doubled in a year. Yeah. I mean, that's massive growth. Like
it depends if you started at 2 and doubled to 4, if you went from 15 to 13. I'm not going to give the numbers, but
I know roughly numbers you shared before. So I'll put it this way: it's impressive feat to double. Yeah. And how do you handle keeping the culture, we'll call it, reasonably consistent? I mean, when you have all these new joiners in the year.
The onboarding process is obviously important.
Yeah.
And as a larger even though we are Telstra Purple as a larger organisation, those onboarding processes aren't always seamless. But we're working as an organisation to improve them.
Yeah.
But it's important that we think, who's going to be your buddy on the first day? I will always make sure, well, within reason, unless I'm in a different country, that I'm there on that person's first day. I'll walk them through the team, I'll walk them through the structure. I'll make sure we go out for lunch. I'll have a buddy with them. If it's someone in the pure delivery team, I'll make sure they're pod leads there. I'm sure they're doing like catch-ups with their pod lead once a fortnight, and I would also check in with them as well. We do stand-ups as a team in person once a fortnight, maybe once every 3 weeks, depending. And the stand-ups are weekly, but try and get everyone face-to-face for the people in Singapore. Our team is across Singapore, Philippines, and we have some strategic delivery partners in India. But where possible, we like to try and get people face-to-face. We try and go out and celebrate as a team. It's about sort of seeing where the numbers are, but how the revenues are coming in, and when we hit kind of some mile points as revenue as a delivery organisation, part of the delivery organisation, we go and celebrate that. That's important as well, right? If we finished on a larger project, I'll go and tell the salesperson, right, you need to go buy everything here lunch. Let's keep it together. Let's keep the bottle around, because that then relationship between the technical consultants, the senior tech consultants, the pre-sales and the sales is important, right? It's all about relationships. It comes back to the same thing. People looking after you. Sorry, I probably went a bit waffly there. The thoughts are coming out of my head as well.
I like the examples of the various activities, right? Because that for me always feels much more real than how sort of like the theoreticals that sort of paints like, well, we have to do X, Y, and Z. It's like, no, these are the things that that you did in this case. Yeah. Sorry, I feel like we're leaving Shan.
Yeah, I was just thinking the same thing. I feel like
I'm just happy to be here.
Sorry, Shan. So maybe you can talk about the company here. How you've gone about and you've grown with some of the.
I think it's quite similar to what you guys talked about. The way that we assess our internal candidates is very much on their attitude, their ability to learn, grow, and fit in more than the technical skill set. Because at the end of the day, technical skills is something that can be taught, right? You just need to have the right person, the right attitude to want to learn, and to work well with others. So I think that's definitely a very, very important factor, culture. We talked about maintaining and building a good culture as we scale up. On the flip side of things, not necessarily scaling down, but in times of uncertainty, like right now, with all the retrenchment that's been going around, how do you guys maintain a positive work culture with all these question marks flying around?
You first, if you join.
Yeah. So we just recently made a. I mean, I don't say it's a large, but it was a business decision, and I think it's actually a really timely question. How it's handled is probably the most key.
The communication.
The communication. I'll point to my old company because that one gets very well documented for every big or small decision that gets made. And I would just say for the viewers or the listeners out there, just go and Google the latest round of Amazon layoffs or retrenchments, and then the articles covering how the CEO handles it, right? Then there's strong opinions, good and bad, but I would say in the past, and then also the current company, how you communicate what is happening, why it's happening, and then also what is the supports like for those who are no longer part of the organization, and also just as importantly, for those who are here and have to pick up the extra tasks. At the end of the day, that's honestly all you can really do. And I think kind of the worst, going to the theme of terrible cultures, I think the worst thing consistently that I've seen in dysfunctional cultures is that inability to communicate.
100%.
Yeah.
And being present.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
These aren't personal decisions against a person. Right? These are business decisions to change. Yeah. And maybe I'll give an example of my last company in Australia, right? Yeah. When I joined, the company was a little bit in Sydney, in Adelaide and Brisbane. And we had to, it wasn't profitable. So we needed to kind of see a better way to serve our customers, right? And that included building a more of a delivery offshore in India and having some more multidisciplinary pods of teams in Sydney, which meant some changes to Brisbane and Adelaide. All right, so one of the first things I had to do in the organisation was to look around and kind of see how we restructured, and had to go and spend some time with people in Adelaide and make some hard decisions. They were business decisions. So I sat down and spoke to everyone individually that was affected and explained why. We then actually had to make a few more changes a year later. And again, the HR said to me, okay, Dan, we'll go and do this. You don't have to. I was like, no chance. Absolutely no chance. This is what we're doing as a business. I've spent a lot of time with these people. I care about these people. As I said, it's not a personal change and choice. We need to reshape as a business to grow and thrive. So I was the one who went there and I spoke to everyone affected one by one, because it's communication and it's being present, right? And really explaining the reasons to them and giving them that support, right? Yeah. Ensuring that we give them the fair package for people who are leaving so they're covered financially, but also the mental side, because some people have been there 12, 13 years. I struggle slightly with some of the American, maybe, I don't know if it's allowed to be said, but I struggle slightly with that culture. I know they're giving good packages, but the way that some people have found out, I personally, as you see, the culture of people is important to me.
And I'm with you, and I mean, I'm American, and that's I don't agree with a lot of the way some certain companies handle the way they do mass terminations. I will say that in this era, the larger companies are in effect still global in nature, and so it's almost just as much the corporate culture that is involved, and not necessarily just we'll call it American labor laws that allow you to do certain things.
Sure, fair point.
Yeah. But I mean, actually, it's interesting to your point, though, because we were actually just talking about it the other day, sort of like the difference in labor laws in, say, Singapore, Australia, and then because we have a sizable presence in Europe, European, labor laws within the EU, and we'll call it sort of, adjacent to EU type countries, and there is a certain part, I mean, really to be fair, around how the governments handle employment contracts. I think Australia is more fair, right?
Well, some people, not myself, think Australia is maybe too much
fair. Yeah.
The other way. And because of the unions, they have so much support for the employees that for underperforming employees, and not just talking about redundancy, it makes it very, very hard to make changes.
Yeah.
So, I guess it's kind of, it's hard, right? Trying to find that balance.
Yeah.
What about changing culture? Have you ever found yourself in a position where you've entered a new team, new company, and the culture's not as ideal as you would like it to be, and you have to effect some change?
That was literally my first project when they joined Amazon. That one I'm going to go for. It's a not safe for podcast conversation. But a couple observations. How about this? Changing culture is hard, and I'll use my favorite analogy, which I always use for innovation and transformation. It's a lot like telling a loved one that they need to change who they are. Really bluntly, though, it's more like telling a loved one that they need to get back into shape, right? And so there's that initial reaction of, who the hell are you telling me to do that? Why don't you do it first? There's the...
Well, it's hard when you first join, because you want to try and build a bit of rapport with people.
Yeah.
And it's really showing people that actually, maybe this is a different way of thinking. Maybe this is a different way of us operating, right? And sorry to jump in. I give the Adelaide example, right? So the first one there, we made some changes, and then it was such a waterfall organisation. Even for all of the projects they should be doing, they could be run in a more agile way.
Yeah.
So it's like education to the team, and really showing them, actually, this is the way we can do it. If we work as a team, if we're more outcome driven, we can actually get to better results for our customers. Oh no, Dan, this is the way that we've always worked. Sure, I understand that. How about for the next project, we try and run it like this, but if it overruns or whatever, don't worry, it's not on you. Let's try it like this. So it's that slowly approach that really shifted the mindset. And if you go back in and speak to some of these people now, and the guy actually had run the Adelaide office for me, he was like, Dan, you were so right. I just needed you to kind of show me that way, rather than come in and just dictate to me, and show me that way. And there's a different way, and that it was going to benefit this, and help me on that journey. And you're 100% right? So it's not about being right, but that was the way that we shifted and changed the culture slightly, and actually help people think in a different way, because they didn't know a different way. So they needed to be shown. Does that answer the question? I'm not sure.
And I love that you just provide that example, because a lot of what we used to see is essentially trying to tell an organization, and usually they'll hire consultants to come in to say, look, you need to change. Here's how you should change. And to your point, it is about demonstrating that change, and where I guess my team had great successes was getting the leadership to try out those changes first, adopt, and then, like you said, it's not a we have to change. Let's try a couple things, and if it works, great. Let's build on that. And that's where I've seen culture move slowly in a positive direction. But it's not a instant weight loss type formula. It does take time, and also in that process, going to kind of right sizing a company, there will be people who will not be a part of that journey or should not be part of that journey. And I think that's also part of that communication around, the times have evolved, our customers have changed, who we need to be, also need to be adapted. Are you willing to be on this journey with us? And I think that's also a very, very hard conversation to have with a lot of folks as well. Absolutely. Yeah.
Final question for the day. What are some of your unpopular, maybe slightly controversial opinions on good culture or building culture?
How about we do one each, back and forth?
Well, you're not always gonna keep everyone happy, right? Mm-hmm. You can have all the best intentions, you can get all the best feedback, you can try and give as many one-to-ones you think for the team is right, and build the culture that you want to have and you think you should have. But not everyone's always going to be happy. There's always probably going to be someone who wanted that promotion that hasn't come soon enough. There's always going to be someone who thinks they should be paid a bit more money, right? Yeah. And maybe they should. I'm not saying they shouldn't, but you're not always going to get the absolute perfect culture. And this is my point.
Culture has to change. I think that's the one thing that successful companies as they scale tend to forget. And it's hard because one is, how do you change culture? What are the mechanisms that you can create that allow both kind of a top-down view of how culture changes, also as well as from the grassroots, right? So I think that's one that, I don't know if it's unpopular, but it's something that anyone
comes
to take it.
I think you've mentioned that a couple of times. I think 100% has to come.
It'll be
both.
It'll be both.
You're right.
It's like top down. Ultimately, well, for me, sets an example that
yes.
A lot of how the culture evolves. Let's take how all the Gen Zs coming into the office, right? That's going to have an impact on your culture. And
I guess what that is, it's not just from Belter, it needs to come from.
Yeah,
you're right.
Yeah. You need that to be down to
both ways, because people need to see that example being set.
Yeah, exactly. Your turn.
I think you're right. It's ever evolving, right?
Yeah.
The world is always changing. People, new Gen Y, Gen Z, how many gens are going to go to? Everyone thinks in a different way. Right? There's always going to be. We need to keep on top of it. As leaders, we need to be constantly thinking and trying to show that we're evolving with the times. Right? The way business was done 20, 30 years ago, with a more dictator-style leadership, is not the way now. It doesn't work. Right? And I'm sure in another 20 years' time, there'll probably be different ways of doing it. Right? So as organizations and as leaders, we need to evolve with the time.
Absolutely. I think, it also is quite closely related to the business goals of the organization. Some smaller companies, the immediate goal is to focus on the here and now. And that's a very different culture to, if you're looking to scale and build something for the long term. And I think, from a third party point of view, as a recruiter, you see that more often than we'd like as well. The differences in terms of culture, and sometimes, management doesn't want to change, right? Because whatever's working right now works, but it might not be the most sustainable method or culture.
I have one last one in this, which is be you. I feel like oftentimes when organization cultures first evolve, it's authentic. You can actually distinguish we'll call it technology firm A from technology B, from both leadership and who you hire. But for some reason, like the larger an organization grows, the more successful, and of course, I guess the more customers you interact with, it becomes harder to not offend people, especially inadvertently. But then you end up with with almost so many compromises in how you operate, the people you hire, and ultimately your culture just becomes, for lack of a better description, bland, right? And so it's not to say go out and shock people, but if there isn't that authenticity, that uniqueness to your culture, and when in rough times, employers have to pick up employees, but it's going to go back to some sort of balance, and those who stay with the company will want to stay because they're proud of who they are first and foremost as a professional, but also who they're associated with as a company. And if your company is just feels like a generic cookie cutter across the same industry, that I feel like is actually the worst use of culture right there.
Well, that's why organisations of Telstra in Australia are going through a reshape of the organisation now. Is that surely the culture's continuously evolving, right? And that we are serving our customers in the best way, right? So it's not just an internal culture; it's a culture back to our customers and how we treat our customers, which is vital. Because if we don't have that culture with our customers and those relationships, what are we doing? What is the business?
Yeah.
Definitely. Relationships first, I agree. I think my own opinion is that people are hard to please. So as organizations grow, you can't please everybody. And you just need out there. Yeah. Well, thank you very much. That's all the time we have today. Thanks again to Wen and Dan. Lovely to have you guys on board for this podcast. Thank you very much. I was just,
sorry,
part of the audience today.
Probably stole a few of your questions, so apologies.
I was like, all these questions.
Well, that's what happens when we don't read the meeting notes. Yeah. It's like, there's questions.
Absolutely. So thanks to you guys again for listening in, and we'll see you on the next podcast.